Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to do brakes on a mid-2000s F-Series Super Duty dually. So I've done this job quite a few times, 15 times at least. I've done it quite a few times. And one of the tricky things about doing this job is actually anytime you do rear brakes on a dually diesel or dually pickup, big, where you got to pull the hubs and, all that stuff, is the torquing of the wheel bearing. So that's always been the tricky part. And it's tricky if you don't have the socket. Well, I work on a lot of different manufacturers, and a lot of different manufacturers have multiple different kinds of sockets. So I've done a lot of front brakes on four-wheel drive, trucks and things like that. And there's a different socket for every single one I've ever done. Never bought the sockets. I've been lucky a few times where people had the sockets, but I've never bought them because I'm not going to go spend 40 bucks every time I do brakes on something. However, I love my Power Strokes. I work on a lot of those things. I work on a lot of dualies, and I've done quite a few brakes on them. And almost every single time, actually, let me take that back. Every single time I've done rear brakes on a dually, on this specific kind of brake job, it's been because of leaking axle seals. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like, what it looks like when you have a leaking axle seal, how to detect it when it first starts. I'm going to show you how to do it, how to take care of it. So one of the things that I did in this video, I've never done before, is I bought an actual socket for a rear wheel bearing nut to torque it. I did this because, well, first of all, I work on a lot of them, and every single one I've ever done has been the same socket. The second reason is because I worked with a guy who had the socket, and I did about 3 brake jobs with that socket, and it was pure gravy. I mean, super easy. Anytime you do rear brakes on a diesel, a dually, anything like that, you don't have the socket. It's always really nerve-wracking because you're using a punch and a hammer to hammer the nut on, to torque it. And you're like not sure, and then sometimes you're not sure, and you grab the wheel and you put the wheel on and you torque and you bolt it up and you give it a wiggle to make sure there's no play in the bearing. And so you waste a lot of time and you have a lot of second guessing. And deep down inside in the back of your mind, you're sitting there going, I hope I'm torquing this right. I know every time I've ever done it, I've always thought that. I've never lost any sleep over it because I've never had a problem. I've always been fortunate that I've always done it right. I've never smoked bearings or smoked the differential or anything like that because of over torquing, and I've never under torqued it and caused a problem. So I've been very fortunate. But in this video, I'm going to show you how easy it is with the socket to do this. And if you work on Power Strokes, if you work on Fords, if you work on these dually F-Series Super Duty trucks, buy this socket. I'm going to put a link in the description below for it. It's going to make it a piece of cake. Let me show you how to do that. So let's get over here and let me show you how to do this brake job. All right, so step 1 is going to be remove both of the wheels. The next step is going to be to pop these axles out. These are 15 millimeter, so I'm going to pop these out. Let me get this off, show you what it looks like. All right, so once you get all those out, just make sure you have a pan down here. You're just going to you're going to hit it. It's going to pop loose. Just let it drain out. And as you pull the axle out, make sure you just wipe off the shaft of the gear oil so it doesn't get everywhere. All right, let me get this out. All right, next step is going to be to disassemble your brakes. Go ahead and take your caliper and put a little pry bar in here and pry the caliper forward and try to pry it through both holes to evenly depress both of the pistons. Get this pulled forward as much as you can. Take this caliper off and then get your pads off and then get your bracket off. All right, the next thing you're going to need, I'll show you now before I take it off, is you're going to need a socket. You can do it without the socket, but it's much easier. So I bought this on Amazon. This was about 20 bucks, and I ordered it one day and I had it like a day or two later. So that's the socket. Because this is a ratcheting mechanism, so when you go to put it back on, it's just easier if you have the socket. You can just torque it to spec, so it just fits right in there. It fits right in those grooves. There's 4 of them. All right. So again, and I'll put a link in the description for this socket. There's many brands. This one was the cheapest, but it was the only one I can get like quick enough for this brake job. So All right, let me get these brakes disassembled and I'll show you what we're gonna do. So if you have a set of sockets like this, stubby metric impact sockets, what you can do is you can get your 1/2-inch ratchet right here and you put your 21mm on here and you have plenty of room to swing this ratchet because these bolts are usually pretty tight and you want 1/2-inch. So the outer caliper here is a 16mm there, and the bolts for the bracket are 21mm. So let's get those off. You can use a hook like this right here, this brake hook, to hang your caliper, so that way it's not hanging by the brake lines, and it'll hang up from right there, and it'll hang perfectly out of your way. When you pull your brake pads off, make sure your hardware stays with the pads so you know where they go. These are to push the pads off of the rotor, so that way it doesn't sit on the rotor all the time. All right, let me get this bracket off. All right, so the next step is pretty simple. You have these 4 notches here, and they're gonna line up in those notches right there. And there's 4 of them. And you're just gonna unthread this. Make sure you have a pan that comes all the way back to the back of the rotor, because your rear seal is gonna leak out fluid, and that way it catches it. So this nut is a ratcheting nut. So once you get a few ratchets, then it will just come out by hand. You won't need a ratchet. All right, let me get this assembly off. All right, so here's what it looks like right here. Here's the back side, okay? This mechanism here will ratchet. Your bearing is right here, so pull your bearing out, and then this whole assembly is gonna come off. And this is a dually, so we have this big hub back here. We gotta get all this off. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this down, get it off, and I'll show you how to disassemble it. One last thing is, on the outer axle, you have an O-ring right there. So make sure you get those O-rings. All right, let me get this off. All right, so here we go. When you put this down on the ground, you wanna put a couple rags down there because a lot of gear oil is gonna run out of this thing and just make a mess. So the first step's gonna be, we gotta break the rotor loose from the hub so we can get that seal off right there. The other thing that you wanna make sure that you have, so you have the seal, the O-ring on the axle, you're gonna have a seal here. And then if your axle seals are leaking, a lot of times you see how this is all like dirt and oil. Well, that's what the back of this thing looks like when they start to leak. You can kind of see how this has a buildup of dirt and oil, and that just shows you the axle seals are leaking. And when that happens, it gets on your shoes here, on your parking shoes, and then your parking shoes aren't going to hold. So, and you can't clean gear oil off of brake lining, and so you're going to need to replace your shoes. And to replace the shoes, they're pretty much like regular brakes. You're going to undo the springs, you're going to undo this spring here, and you're going to undo this upper spring here. Actually, we're going to do this spring and then take these clips off, and then the whole shoes are going to slip down, and then that's going to allow us to get this spring off right here. But first, let's go ahead and get this rotor separated from the hub, and then get that axle out of there. I mean, get that axle seal out of there. All right, so an easy way to get the seal out is the same as a rear main. You just run like a self-tapping screw down here, and then you come from both sides with a pry bar and you pry it up, and it'll pry this seal out. Get the seal out, get the bearing out, get everything cleaned up, and get your bearing packed with grease, and then put a new seal in there, and then you're just gonna set your rotor on top. And I like to put Loctite on the bolts and zap the bolts down, and then we'll get these parking shoes out. All right, let's go. Okay, so once you take off the lower spring, you're gonna pop out your adjuster. Okay, make sure that you keep track of which way it goes, which side the wheel goes on, and then you're gonna take these clips out here, and all you do is come on this side of the clip and you push straight in with a screwdriver, and then you can take a smaller screwdriver and put it between your screwdriver here and between the pin right there. And then you just give it a little push and it pushes this clip down. This side was like this and this side was up, and then it just pushes it up, and then the clip comes off, and then your one shoe will slip to the side like this, and then you can undo your spring, and then you get your new shoes and you set your spring in there and you get your shoe. You got to make sure that you position this correctly, on your shoe, and you're going to set it here and here, and then you're just going to push this in and then put your clips in, and that's how you do your parking shoes. All right, let me get this up. So once you get the backside to pop out, then the whole thing just slips right out just like this, and then you lay this down, get your new shoes, get your spring ready, and just get all this lubed up. You can see right there that groove that your shoes got to go in there and up here, and then the other side just pushes right up in here, and that's how it works. And then just get all this all cleaned up. Get new shoes. I'll clean it up before you put your shoes on, that way you don't get all this crap on your new shoes. And then what I would do is test fit your rotor before you put your rotor and your hub together. Take your rotor and slip it over and make sure your shoes are adjusted properly, and that way it's pretty close. Your parking shoes will be pretty close. All right, let me get this cleaned up. All right, another little tip is once you get everything cleaned up, move your bucket away, because it never fails. Every single time you leave that bucket there, you drop something in there. I dropped one of the clips and a screwdriver into some old gear oil and brake clean and all that. So anyways, I got this all cleaned up here. It's not too bad to get this in here. It's pretty easy. Just use your body. If you don't have a friend, what I do is I get this set up and I push on this side of the clip like this, and I just push in with my right here, and then I take a little hammer, and then you use your finger from the back, and you keep the pin pushed all the way in, and then you just tap this and it will slide right over the pin, and then just get it positioned. So that's about it there. And then just put your lower clip on, your lower spring, and then, like I said, use your rotor. I'm waiting on seals, I didn't get them, so use your rotor to get your parking brake pretty close, and that's about it. And then we're going to be putting this back together once I get my seals, and I'll show you how that's going to go. All right, here we go. So what you want to do is pack your bearings, your inner and outer bearings. You can use one of these, a little handy packer. You can use a big packer, like we have one that sits in a bucket. I like my own here. So you're just going to take this off like this and put your bearing in there and push down until the bearing grease comes out of the top right here. You'll see it push out, and then just rub it all around, and that way when you put it in, your bearings aren't dry. You can do it, you know, the old-fashioned way, where you put it in your hand and you run the bearing back and forth along that. I'm not going to do that. That takes way too long and it's too messy. Plus I have a packer. So anyways, that's what you want to do to get your bearings all ready before you get your seals. All right, let me do that. Okay, so once you have your bearings packed and you have your seals and everything, the next step is I like to just put a thin layer of grease around the bearing race. You've packed your bearings, so that way it's not dry going in. The gear oil will lubricate the bearings, but this is to keep them from being dry. And then you're going to take your seal, you're going to put your bearing in there, and you're going to take your seal and set it in there. And best thing to do is try to find something that is close to the size that you can put on, and that way you can hit it, and it will actually bottom out right here. So your seal will bottom out. Just make sure that it bottoms out all the way around. And then the other thing I like to do is, a couple more things I forgot to show you is, one, make sure that this part right here, that this goes into the groove of the parking shoe. This side I put it together, and I actually had it sitting above the groove. So I had to drop it down. You got to make sure that your shoes sit even with the top of here. I like to lube up all of the points where the metal, you can see the purple. I like to lube all that up. And then also your adjuster. You want to run that thing out and put some grease in there so it doesn't seize up. And then I actually will put a little bit of grease around here where the bearing and the seal are going to ride, so that way it doesn't go dry and tear it. So once we've done that, you're going to get your bearing in there, hammer your seal in, then you're going to set your new rotor on top of here, Put a little bit of Loctite on your bolts. Gun those suckers on. And then we're going to set the whole rotor and hub assembly up here. We're going to slide our outer bearing in. And then we're going to get our axle nut started. We're going to run it in. And I'll tell you about torquing that when I get to that point. Okay, so when you get your hub on there, it's not going to slide up all the way. You'll notice that it'll be back from the backing plate, maybe a ½ inch. What you want to do is you want to have a dead blow like this, all right? And then hit it around here, and you'll feel it bottom out. And you'll notice that this center axle, the center axle right here, you'll notice it's centered in between the hub. Then you're going to slide your outside bearing in. Then you're going to put your ratcheting nut on there, and you're going to use your socket that you have, and you're going to push in, and you're going to turn it to 70 foot-pounds. Double check your torque spec, because I'm not sure, you know, if every application is this way, but this one here is 70. You go 70 while you're turning it. You go torque it a little bit and turn it. And what you're doing is you're making sure that the bearings are seated all the way up, and you're turning it to make sure it's not cockeyed. So you're going to go 70 foot-pounds, and then you're going to back it off 180 degrees, and you're going to go 15 foot-pounds. And then what I recommend that you do is that you get one wheel and you mount it on here, and you run the lug nuts in, and then you move the wheel and tire side to side and up and down to make sure there's no bearing play. Because if you torque this thing to 70, back it off, and then go 15, and something didn't go right, you'll have play. If you don't have any play in your wheel and tire, then that means that you got the bearing seated and it torqued properly. Once you get done with that, take the wheel back off and reassemble the brakes, and then test drive it, and then just make sure that before you get all done, that you double check back here, and that you don't have any liquid or any signs of gear oil, because then you won't know if you fixed it or not. You'll go test drive it, and you'll come back and look, and you'll see a little bit of wet, and you'll think that you have a leak, but you didn't. It's just from previous. And then make sure when you do your brake pads, make sure you put your hardware back on there. Okay? All right, that's about it. All right, one last thing is don't forget to put your new O-ring on here. All right, I got the axle in. I'm about to tighten it down, so put your new O-ring on there. All right, and then to get this axle in, sometimes you have to push it down and slide it in and turn it, and you'll get it to go in, and everything will line up. And then do a little tiny dab of Loctite on the bolts, and then gun them in, and let's get this thing back together. All right, so anytime you do brakes, you want to make sure you take your caliper slide pins out and clean them off and lubricate them. Do both of them. What I like to do is take a wire brush and brush this off right here, and I put some brake lube in there as well, just to keep the brakes from making noise and hanging up. All right, let me get this on. Okay, so after watching this video, I hope you feel confident doing this brake job. Hopefully with this video, I've taught you how to do the parking shoes, how to adjust them, the rotors, how to torque that wheel bearing, and just showing you just how easy it is. Now, I used 2 different torque wrenches when I did mine. I have my big snap-on torque wrench that I used, and that was, I think, the 70 foot-pounds. And I think I did it. I torque it probably about 3 times. I torque it 70, and then I turn it, and I hit it again, and I turn it, and I give it about 2 revolutions, and then I do it again. And the reason is because if that bearing is not quite seated, I mean, if it was just the slightest bit that way, and you torque it, and then all of a sudden when it turns, that bearing goes right in where it's supposed to be, it's going to be too loose. So you really got to make sure you seat that bearing. If you don't have a torque wrench, you're just torquing that thing till it's tight. I mean, you're torquing it down, and you're just pushing that bearing all the way inside. And then you're backing it off, and then that 15 foot-pounds. Now, the key is to push the socket all the way in, and you'll feel it. It'll push away from the ratcheting mechanism. And you're going to torque it, and then when you let go, that locks it back in. So you're pushing it in, You're torquing it, and then you let go, and then it comes out and it locks it in place. So that's the key. Anyways, thanks for watching the video. Hope I taught you something. I'll put a link in the description for the socket. Check out, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all my future content. Also, check me out on Instagram at Nuts and Bolts with Tone for my daily life as a mechanic. If you tune in there, you might see some new tools that I haven't shown on my channel yet that you get to see on my Instagram, because I show them a little bit sooner as I show them in the stories. So also check out my merchandise store. Get a coffee cup, get yourself a t-shirt, sweatshirt, stay warm while you're watching my videos. Anyways, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.